In this video, we're going to complete the KutaSoftware Infinite PreAlgebra free worksheet, Proportions. You can find this free worksheet on the KutaSoftware website. I'll leave a link in the description below so you know how to access it. Now, for the first part of this worksheet, we're going to state if each pair of ratios forms a proportion. So what that means is, if we jump into number 1, looking at that, we need to see if 4 halves and 26 are equivalent. But let's think about it this way. 4 over 2, this is a fraction, and it's kind of like saying 4 divided by 2, which is equivalent to 2. So, if these ratios form a proportion, then 20 over 6 should also equal 2. And 20 divided by 6 is not 2. If this was a 12, 12 divided by 6 is 2, but 20 divided by 6 is not. Therefore, no, in number 1, those ratios do not form a proportion. Let's move on to number 2. In number 2, we have 3 halves and 18/8. So we have to ask ourselves, are those equivalent? So 3 halves, that's equal to 1.5. Well, is 18/8 equal to 1.5? That's a little bit hard to think about. So let me show you another trick for figuring out if these are equivalent. If they're equivalent, then we're saying that 3 halves is equal to 18/8. That is what we're questioning. So I'll put a question mark above that because we do not know if this is true or not. And I think an easier way to figure this out is by cross multiplying. So we're going to multiply 3 to 8, and we're going to multiply 2 to 18. If 3 times 8 equals 2 times 18, then we know that those are equivalent. We're going to do 3 times 8, and I'll represent times with a little dot. We're going to see if that is equal to 2 times 18, or 18 times 2. Again, we're seeing if those are equal. 3 times 8 equals 24, and 18 times 2 is 36. So because 24 does not equal 36, then for number 2, our answer is also no. So approaching these problems using the method we used in number 1 or the method we used in number 2 will give us that same result. So throughout this worksheet, I'll mix it up and do a little of both. In number 3, we're going to see if 4/3 is equivalent to 16/12. So I'll solve this one by cross multiplying. 4 times 12, does that equal 3 times 16, or 16 times 3? 4 times 12 is 48, and 3 times 16 is also 48. So yes, in number 3, these ratios form a proportion. And another trick, just because there's so many different ways to think about ratios and proportions, how do we go from 4 to 16? Going from 4 to 16, we have to multiply by 4. Now we can ask ourselves, going from 3 to 12, can we multiply by that same number? Yes, we can. So that's another way to think about figuring out whether proportions are equivalent or not. Let's do that in number 4. So in order to go from 4 to 8, looking at just those numerators, what do I have to multiply by? That would be multiplying by 2. And going from 3 to 6, what do I have to multiply by? Again, I multiply by 2. So because I'm multiplying by that same factor, then yes, these are equivalent in number 4 as well. Go ahead and try setting this up with cross multiplication. Let's do it quickly in our heads. 4 times 6 is 24, and 3 times 8 is 24. These are indeed equivalent. Looking at number 5, going from 12 to 3, I need to divide by 4. And going from 24 to 4, if I divided 24 by 4, I would not get 4. So I know that no, these are not equivalent. But let's do that cross multiplication. 12 times 4, that's going to give me 48. And 3 times 24, what will that give me? That will give me 76. 2. 48 does not equal 72, therefore our answer in number 5 is no. And in number 6, think about going from 6 to 2. How do you get there? Divide by 3. Going from 9 to 3, how do you get there? Is it that same? Yeah, we're going to divide by 3. So again, that's another way to know if these are equivalent. So our solution in number 6 is yes. And quickly doing cross multiplying in our heads, 6 times 3 is 18, and 9 times 2 is 18. 18 equals 18. Now for the rest of this worksheet, we're going to be solving each proportion. And what this means to solve a proportion, we're essentially just going to figure out what this variable is equal to. What does that variable have to be in order to make this equality true? So let's look at this second fraction that's already filled out for us. 8 over 4, we know that equals 2. So 10 divided by what would equal 2? To make this proportion true, k would have to be equal to 5. 10 divided by 5 is 2, and 8 divided by 4 is 2. And then we can double check that by cross multiplying. If I filled in a 5 here, 10 times 4 is 40, and 5 times 8 is also 40. Moving on to number 8, this one gets a little trickier, because if we think back above what we were doing before we got to this next section, we could find how to go from the numerator to the other numerator and see if that was the same result going from the denominator to the other denominator. So going from 10 to 3, what are we doing? That's kind of a little hard to see right off the bat. So let's use cross multiplication to help us figure this out. Remember, m times 3 is going to equal that other cross of 10 times 10. So m times 3 equals 10 times 10. Well, that means that m times 3 is going to equal 100. And what times 3 equals 100? That might be a little hard to guess, but we can just take this m and divide everything by 3, and we have to do that on both sides. So we'll get that m is going to be equal to 100 divided by 3. And what exactly is that? That's going to be one of those repeating decimals. 100 divided by 3 is going to be 33.3 repeating, so I'll round to that nearest hundredth, 33.33. Let's move on to our next problem. In number 9, 2 over x is equal to 7 over 9. Let's go ahead and continue using that cross multiplying because I don't see something simple to go from 2 to 7, and also 7 divided by 9 doesn't give me a nice whole number to work with. So 2 times 9 is going to equal x times 7. So 2 times 9 is going to equal x times 7. Now what we need to try to figure out is what this x is. 2 times 9 I know is 18, and then I'll have x times 7 still. So all I have to do is divide by 7. 18 sevenths is going to equal x. So if I type that into a calculator, 18 divided by 7 is going to give me about 2.57. And you can double check that by doing 2 divided by 2.57 and then 7 divided by 9 and seeing if those are equivalent. And again, in number 9 we rounded, so it might be slightly off, but it will be very close. In number 10, again, I think our safest bet is to cross multiply. So 3 times 10 equals x times 7. 3 times 10 is 30, so 30 is going to equal x times 7, but I need to know what x is, so I'll just divide by 7. 30 over 7 is going to equal x, and 30 divided by 7, doing that on a calculator, is about 4.28. 4.857, so I'm going to round up to 4.29. For some reason, on the worksheet they have 4.28, they rounded down, but I was rounding to that nearest hundredth, that's why I got 4.29. Moving right along to the second page, we're going to go over number 11. Now looking at number 11, I can easily find a whole number to go from 4 to 2, looking at just those numerators. Going from 4 to 2, I just need to divide by 2. So in order to go from 9 to x, I need to do the same thing if these are indeed equivalent. So again, I need to divide by 2, which 9 divided by 2, I can do in my head, but feel free to use a calculator. 9 divided by 2, or 9 over 2, is going to equal x, and that's 4.5. So 4.5 is our solution in number 11. And if you wanted to do the cross-multiplying way, we would get that 4x equals 18, and then we divide both sides by 4 to get that x equals 18 fourths, but 18 fourths simplifies down to 9 halves when dividing both by 2. Continuing on to number 12, we can use that same trick. How do we go from 6 to 3? To go from 6 to 3, we divided it by 2. So to go from a to 8, we also need to divide by 2. So a over 2 is equal to 8. A divided by 2 equals 8. What divided by 2 equals 8? Well, a is going to equal 8 times 2, right? Because we can multiply 2 by both sides to cancel that 2 out. So a is going to equal 8 times 2, which is 16. 16 divided by 2 is indeed 8. In number 33, they start mixing things up a bit by not just having a variable now, but also having a number with that variable. So what I like to do in all my problems, I like to simplify first if I can. 8n divided by 8, this 8 divided by 8 is equivalent to 1. So I have n over 1, which n divided by 1 is n. So I have that n is equal to 8/3. That's how I'm going to solve my proportion. So 8 divided by 3, when I enter that in my calculator, is 2.6 repeating. So that's 2.6 rounding to 7. On the worksheet, they left it as 2.66, but if we continued this on, that 6 would round up to 7. So I'm writing this as 2.67. Number 14, 7/9 equals a over 5. Well, there's not a nice way to go from 9 to 5 without getting decimals involved, so let's go ahead and do our cross-multiplying method. We'll do 7 times 5 and set that equal to 9 times a. 7 times 5 is 35, and if that equals 9 times a, well, that means that a is going to be equal to 35 divided by 9, which 35 divided by 9, using a calculator again, is 3.8 repeating. So that's 3.8888, and that continues on. But I'm going to round that to the nearest hundredth, so I'm going to write that as 3.8, and then rounding to that nearest hundredth, that next 8 would round up to a 9. So 3.89. Again, the solutions online have this as 3.88, but they did not round to the closest hundredth, they rounded it down. In number 15, we're solving for what p is equal to. And we have a very nice exchange here. 8 and then what, either multiplied or divided, will give us 2. And that's 8 divided by 4. So I know that p divided by 4, or p over 4, since I prefer to write it as a fraction, is going to be equal to 13. So we just got to figure out what divided by 4 equals 13. In order to do that, we'll just multiply 13 by 4. And 13 times 4 equals 52. So 52 is our solution in number 15. In number 16, Going from 13 to 3, there's not a nice whole number, so let's just go ahead and do that cross multiplication. So I have 3 times 3, that's going to be equal to 13 times v. 3 times 3 is 9, and if that equals 13 times v, well, in order to figure out what v is, all I'm going to do is divide 9 by 13. So 9 over 13 equals v, which 9 over 13 is 0.692, which rounds to 0.69 or 69 hundredths. If I'm being honest with you, if I was your instructor, I would have you leave all of these in fraction form as opposed to rounding. That way you could do everything in your head without a calculator. So if your instructor prefers that, once you get to 9/13, knowing that's equal to v, that's what it is, 9/13. But again, that's up to your teacher. In number 17, we have another easy one, because going from 10 to 2, all we have to do is divide by 5. So because we're dividing by 5, when we go from 10 to 2, going from 12 to n, we're also dividing 12 by 5. So 12 over 5, 12 divided by 5 will equal n, which if I enter that in on my calculator, 12 divided by 5 is 2.4. So 2.4 is our solution in number 17. In number 18, let's go with that cross multiplication method. 11 times 11 equals 10 times r. 11 times 11 is 121, and that equals 10 times r. So in order to solve for r, all we need to do is divide 121 by 10. And the nice thing about that is all I have to do is move that decimal place over to get 12.1. So 12.1 is equal to r. 12.1 is our solution. And again, when dividing by 10, you're just shifting that decimal place over 1 to the left. Just as if you were multiplying, you'd be shifting it over 1 to the right and filling in a 0 if necessary. Now in number 19, we can go with cross multiplication and get that x times 14 equals 9 times 7. So 14 times x would equal 63. And then divide that by 14, and that would give us, doing that on the calculator, 4.5. That's our solution in number 19. However, if you look at this, 7 over 14 can be simplified. 7 over 14, well, x over 9 would be equal to 7/14 is 1/2, because 7 is half of 14, so 1/2. So it might be easier to set up this proportion. X times 2, when we cross multiply, equals 1 times 9. X times 2 equals 1 times 9, which is 9. Then all we have to do is divide 9 by 2, which gives us, again, that same result of 4.5. These numbers were just smaller, so we were actually able to do them in our heads. In number 20, we have a over 10 equaling 11 over 14. If I were to cross multiply, I'd get that a times 14 equals 10 times 11. So that is a times 14 equals 110. Again, multiplying by 10 is just shifting that decimal over by 1 and filling it in with a 0. 110. Now, all that's left to figure out what a is to divide by 14. So 110 over 14 will be my solution. Both are even, so I can simplify this down. However, if I'm just using my calculator, I'll get 7.857, which I'll round to 7.86. Again, the online solutions say 7.85, but they round it down as opposed to rounding to the closest hundredth. And number 21, here's an easier one to work with, because in order to go from 12 to 2, what do we multiply or divide by? That's going to be a 6. And when I say going from one number to the next number, I'm not talking about adding or subtracting. This is only through multiplication or division. So going from 12 to 2, we divide by 6, which means that we need to divide v by 6 to get 10. That means that v is going to equal 10 times 6, because v over 6 equals 10 would be v equals 10 times 6, so v is equal to 60. So 60 is our solution. And just to give you another option or another way to think about this, 10 divided by 2 is equal to 5. So we can ask ourselves, what divided by 5 equals 12? Again, that's 60. 60 divided by 12 also equals 5. So there are lots of ways of thinking about ratios and proportions. I'm just throwing a couple different methods at you because some are easier on certain problems. And the more practice you get, the easier it will be to think about which method to use. In number 22, now I can go ahead and start with cross multiplying, but doing 14 times 5 in my head might be a little tricky. So why don't I go ahead and simplify this fraction down first since it's even? 6 divided by 14, if I did 6 divided by 2, that would be a 3 in my numerator. And if I did 14 divided by 2, that would be 7 in my denominator. So now I'll cross multiply with these fractions or these proportions as opposed to that first one. So 5 times 7 equals 3 times n. That's 35 equals 3 times n, which means that n is going to equal 35 over 3, which, going to our calculator, 35 over 3 gives us 11.6 repeating. So rounding, that will be 11.67. And again, the worksheet has 11.66, but if we're rounding to the closest hundredth, that would be 11.67. So quickly, without simplifying, do the cross multiplication of those first two and see what you get. I guarantee you'll get the same exact result as when we simplified. And with that, we wrap up this proportions worksheet. If this was your first introduction to proportions, hopefully you learned a lot and were able to take away from this video. If you've worked with proportions before, hopefully I showed you a couple new tricks and ways to think about proportions. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thanks again, and see you next video.